Hello everyone, and welcome to another episode of Zareth Prevails, a Grand Arena, the first Grand Arena Championship that is officially actually a championship as opposed to an exhibition is underway. We've already finished 2 matches, and so this is the second match. I am really excited to show you guys this match because my opponent not only had an amazing roster and amazing mods and amazing gameplay, but I get to make a lot of really rough decisions, and you guys can see me struggle the whole way through. So I'm really excited about going into this match. I really wanted to carry on the momentum that I had built after beating my first round opponent, who was no joke in terms of roster. And immediately after researching my opponent a little bit, I noticed that they didn't necessarily have a ton more GP than me, but they had a lot more other things than me, especially mods. I mean, if you look at the bottom of the screen right now, the mods are completely ridiculous and out of this world. I was really going to struggle against that, as you will see in a little bit, but it also afforded me the opportunity to really step up my gameplay, and I don't necessarily know that I did that, but I certainly had the opportunity. So one relatively lucky thing in terms of this matchup was that I had a faster Darth Revan and faster Badstilla, which means that I can almost certainly beat that team with my own Darth Revan, which I have on offense. And even though I'm kind of working in the background on trying to find a good match up for Darth Revan that doesn't involve my own Darth Revan, currently that's kind of my solution. So really the first thing you want to do in the Grand Arena match is make sure that you can always beat all of your opponent's teams. And if that means that you have to leave your own Darth Revan on offense the way I do, then so be it. So it's something that we talk about a lot in my most recent podcast, but the theory behind Grand Arena is that offense matters way more than defense in terms of your total score and your ability to advance to Kyber League. You get 0 points for defending anything, but you get a lot of points for destroying all the things. So being more efficient on offense is really a better tactic at this point in Grand Arena Championships, just because you need to get all the points that you can. So you can see here that I'm playing a little bit cagey here with my opponent's team. Every time they have fear debuffed on them, I've just kind of sidestepping them when possible, just to allow for the maximum amount of turns lost on their side. And I targeted Badstilla first just because she is really important to that team. She's arguably more important than anyone else on the team, actually, which sounds ridiculous, I realize, but once you can take her down, the rest of the team really folds pretty quickly. So that's what I did, and just by kind of playing cagily, I managed to get 59 banners, which is an excellent result, of course, but it's also something to keep in mind. You can actually practice that matchup every day in Arena, and I know that it's not fun. I don't enjoy it either, but it's one of the very few times that we get free practice. So after I had attacked Darth Revan, I noticed that my clone team had just kind of disappeared, and as it turned out, my opponent had attacked my clones while I was attacking. So it was kind of going to be that kind of a match where I would make attacks, they would make attacks, and little did they know that I was just on my lunch break and that I wouldn't be able to attack the full amount before I had to go in. I wouldn't be able to clear them if that was possible. So anyways, I did want to at least get through one more team, just because if I could, I would be able to kind of plan while I was at work. I know that's professional, right? But I'd be able to figure out like what teams to save, what teams to use, so that later I would be able to beat them. And I decided to go for a Jedi Revan lead instead of a Bastilla lead. And that's just because I've been struggling lately to beat the multi-Gear 13 General Grievous squads with Bastila lead, and I know that that's been something I've been kind of preaching lately. I love using Bastila lead against General Grievous, but in the past few matches, I have not been able to take down the Grievous squad with them. So I decided to try Hermit Yoda, which I really don't know if that was wise. He's gear 11, so he just died really fast. I should really probably put more gear on him, honestly, but I don't think he's ever died first in any match that I've ever had. And right away, Jolie took one, and immediately, like, I was down to 2 guys left. I don't even remember when Revan used his savior ability, to be honest, and so I really wasn't sure. Like, this is pretty uneven footing. General Grievous is obviously really hard to take down. Droidica has his immunity stuff that can happen, and luckily Revan still had Mark, so I could kind of just ignore when Grievous put Mark on Droidica, and you know, at the very least I would be able to take down the the leader of this squad, and I could 2-hit it, but Droidica, of course, put up his impenetrable shield thing and was just going to wait me out and build up a ton of steam, and I wasn't actually sure at the time. I decided not to spend the time trying to find out if Droidica would be able to bypass my foresight, but I did decide to do my best to engineer it so that when Droidica and do his super shot, that I would have foresight on both of my guys so that I would maybe be able to survive. And I did manage to keep that on Revan, but as you can see, that did nothing for him. And I think I was just lucky that Droidica chose Revan instead of Grandmaster Yoda, because I'm not sure that Revan would have been able to finish off Droidica in time before Droidica got enough turns to get invulnerability back and inevitably just take out Revan as well. So I got relatively lucky. I got 47 banners, which I was really happy with. And right after that attack, I noticed that my opponent had already killed 2 more of my teams, so that was not the ideal circumstance that I wanted. But the good news was that my opponent had put First Order and Old Republic in the back corner, and that really it isn't necessarily the strongest team to be able to rely on defense. So I absolutely had the tools to deal with that, and as you can see, my opponent just keeps eating my teams. I took screenshots in between. They were being kind of efficient. I mean, they weren't getting full 60s on all of their attacks, maybe some of them, but for the most part I was taking down banners. And so anyways, I had to go back into work, so I sent a message to them and just said, hey, I'm leaving. You've done a good job so far. I don't want to slow roll you or kind of trick you into going, assuming that I was going to keep going. And they responded like, oh, hey, you have a good roster. You can read the chat if you want. I did screenshot it. It's back there. Moving on to clearing this other side, I was in a little bit of a conundrum just because my opponent had not put Geonosians in the back zone that I had revealed, and I suspected that Geonosians were going to be in the back zone that was behind this one. So I really, the only obvious counter to Geonosians that I had were Darth Revan and Jedi Knight Revan, and both of those I had already used, as you've already seen. So the only real option that I had to take out Geonosians that was super obvious was Traya, but likewise, the only real option that I had to take out this Padme team, which had a ton of gear 13s and a lot of really great mods, like a super fast team. Everyone was in the 120s, plus 120 on their mods, and so I decided to take Traya. Traya does a really great job of kind of negating a lot of the things that the Padme squad does well, and really just being able to prevent Padme from maximizing on protection up, just because none of my guys were able to counter. It is a really huge boon to facing the squad with Traya, and otherwise doing things like isolate to make sure that they're not getting their protection up buffs in some cases, and really like when the Padme team counters, which you don't really see that too much here, I suppose, but in certain circumstances they do counter quite a bit, and if that happens, then the team just kind of folds in on itself, just because every time it counters, Traya's lead takes their max health, which they've really maximized because it's a Padme team. It takes 35% of their max health down. So Traya does a lot of really great things, even at gear 12 versus mostly gear 13. My mods were absolutely inferior to my opponents in this match. That Padme team was seriously one to reckon with, but Traya just provides too strong of a counter. She's just got too many tools to beat Traya, or rather, to beat Padme. And because I was able to beat that, that meant that I would need to use my Padme team to take out Nightsisters. Now, for a little bit, I had kind of contemplated taking my bounty hunters against this squad, and I decided that my opponent had put too much investment in it. Their DACA was at gear 13. At least one of their other guys was at gear 13. In fact, almost all of my opponent's gear 13 were on defense, in the first row, no less. So I just decided to take my old standby, which was Padme, but because I was concerned that Geonosians were in the back zone, I decided that I would take, instead of C-3PO, I would take Zeta Barriss with Padme, which isn't as good as 3PO, but she does actually attack, which 3PO doesn't, so that's kind of nice. You get to use her stacks of courage. Furthermore, the real advantage to taking Zeta Barriss here is that I'm saving C-3PO to go on either my Commander Luke team or on Jedi Training Rey to be able to take out Geonosians later. With all those exposes that I'm landing, I should, in theory, be able to take out a Geonosian team with either Commander Luke or with Jedi Training Rey. But you need 3PO to be able to do it. All those exposes are. In this match, Padme really kind of counters Nightsisters in the same way that Traya counters Padme, just because Padme has so many internal strengths that kind of negate the way Nightsisters operate. Nightsisters are known to have huge health pools, for instance, and courage is a direct response to that. You can really just take out the Nightsisters really easily just because you're doing percent health, so it doesn't matter. They could have 10 million hit points, and even if they do, the Padme squad is going to be able to take them out with a couple stacks of courage, just because that's the way the mechanic works. And further, they're immune to debuffs when they have protection up, which they often do have protection up. They have multiple sources of cleanse. They have a lot of natural healing ability. And in this case, they have even more healing ability than usual because I took Barriss there instead of 3PO. I, for the record, do think that Barriss is an inferior version of 3PO in this team, but I really needed 3PO, as I mentioned before, to potentially counter Geonosians in the back zone. So here you want to destroy Daka first. She's the most obvious choice just because she's got she's got the huge health pool, she's got stuns, but the most important thing is that Daka is capable of reviving the entire team. After her, it's really kind of your call. I decided here not to prolong the fight. A lot of times you can just kill zombie over and over and over again to regenerate your protection, but this team doesn't really have a way to regenerate their protection, so getting 56 banners, I mean, that's not wonderful, but it's still, I mean, you win on the first try. It's in the 50s. That's not absolutely terrible either. So I'm beating Nightsisters. I was really nervous. I didn't want to see Geonosians in the back because I don't feel super confident with either Jedi Training Rey or CLS to beat Geonosians, but luckily they did not have Geonosians back there, and in fact they had a really fast bounty hunter team, which I wasn't quite sure about. So I've been growing up my Stark to be able to beat this Jango team, and the key to the Jango team is obviously to just go really, really fast, and you can see 287, but Jango also gives plus 30 speed to himself and all of his other guys, so Jango and Bosk were both extremely fast here. Luckily, my Stark is at 320 before Veers' lead. The thing I realized right before this match, though, was that I had forgotten to put the last piece of gear onto Range Trooper, which means that he was kind of operating at a little less speed. So even though Stark would go significantly faster than the Bosk, or rather the Jango team, I wasn't sure if I'd be able to drag Range Trooper up. And I did the math, and I worried about it for a long time, and I decided I would just try it, because why should I put Gear 13 on Stark if I was just going to run away from the challenge? And so I went for it, and as it turned out, my math told me that I was about 5 speed at close or faster than Bosk or Jango, and so I went for it. Range did get to go before them, and as you can see, if Stark can go then and pull Range to be faster than all the other opponents, then Troopers can just wipe the floor with bounty hunters. And I was really excited to see that my theory craft had paid off, because that was a huge investment on my part to put all that gear on. Now the team below kind of intrigues me a little bit, actually. They were using a Dengar lead, which means all my critical hits would be minus 50% damage, which in a lot of cases would mean that they were the exact same damage as a regular hit. And so I wasn't really sure. My opponents were hiding Nest as well, and I've never faced this team. I decided to try Jedi Training Rey against this instead of against First Order, which, looking back, I'm not sure that was the absolute best choice, but it certainly wasn't like the absolute worst either. My goal here was just to stun Nest, which I obviously failed at. R2 has a huge amount of potency. He apparently failed his 80% check to stun her, is my guess, or he just rolled low on his potency and she rolled high, or however that works. So the first thing you want to do in any team with Vendor Chewie is to kill Vendor Chewie, just because he does so much good for that team. He's really frustrating in terms of which is of course his revive of other scoundrels when they die. So being able to take out Vander right off the bat is extremely important for this team, unless you can somehow sneak in a kill before he gets prepared up. And I was a little bit frustrated that I had not been able to kind of negate Nest at this point, just because if I'd been able to stun her right away, that would have really helped me a lot in terms of being able to control the match as it stood. My entire team was dazed, which meant that the thing that they run best on, which is extra turn meter, they weren't able to really accumulate any of that, and I needed as much time as I could to be able to fight this team, just because they were, or rather I was, really kind of just fighting the clock. Nest would not be able to clear me at this point, I was fairly certain, but being able to take her down takes a few minutes, especially because I have 3PO here. His basic is going to reduce Nest's turn meter, and it's a really tricky thing trying to make sure that Nest gets the turns, but also gets stunned and gets dazed. You don't really want to use anything but basics. However, C3PO only, like his basic reduces her turn meter regardless, so I was well aware that the clock was ticking down, and if you want to watch something nerve-wracking, just watch her turn meter throughout the rest of this match. It just keeps going down and bobbing down, and the goal here is, if you haven't killed Nest before or aren't really acquainted with her kit, is at the start of her turn, all of her bonus protection goes away. So you stun her, and then she takes a turn, which is just standing there and getting rid of stun, and then all of her bonus protection goes away, and then you have to try the best you can to re-stun her, or she's just going to take another turn. She's going to regenerate all of her health, and it's just going to be a mess. Not to mention she starts doing some really crazy damage at some point. So luckily BB-8 has tenacity down, but that's kind of a double-edged sword, because tenacity down means that all of the effects that I'm doing to her are going to work, which means like when 3PO goes, it reduces her turn meter. And so the hope is, of course, to just be able to stun her, then hit her for some damage, then let her come out of stun, then hit her for some more damage. And as you can see, trying to do more and more damage is, I mean, it's futile, because her protection, her bonus protection, is so built up at this point. So I'm just doing as fast of basics as I can, and of course C-3PO is getting in the way and doing his stupid stuff again, because he's C-3PO, and he tends to do that, especially in the movies. And I was just racing against the clock here. I thought that I'd be able to do well, but one thing to keep in mind is that the droids also don't really hit that hard, so I wanted to save their specials so that if it turned out that Nest came out of her turn after her special, then or right before them, they would be able to use their special and kind of defer their attacks to the rest of my team. So I was able to get the win there, but I dropped 4 banners, and that was frustrating because I had Illuminated Destiny available. I think I could have kept a couple of those banners, but I was really nervous about making sure I had enough time to take out Nest, and by doing Illuminated Destiny, it would be a whole nother round of clicking on basics, and you just never know how fast you're going to be able to take out Nest. And really, that's why I advocate for Nest to go on defense a lot, because one slip up and your opponent can really just your opponent might just lose just from one small mistake. Even a good player can fail against Nest. So I decided to take First Order against Carth, which I knew would work, but it is always nerve-wracking because you don't know. I mean, if Canderous can kind of get the bit in his teeth and just start doing a ton of damage, if he was able to take out First Order Officer, I only had 3 banners advantage here, and if I drew against my opponent would actually beat me in terms of tiebreakers. So I needed to make sure that I got as many points as I could, especially after my huge fail with Jedi Training Rey against Nest there, which maybe it wasn't a fail, but we can talk about that later, or just never talk about it again, whatever you prefer. So Carth is really the easiest, most obvious guy to take out first, and you really just want to make sure that Carth gets taken out. Like, you can kind of incidentally take him out. He is incredibly easy to destroy, and really I was thinking that in this match the real key was to take Canderous out as early as I could, just so he wouldn't go crazy on any of my characters and do enough damage that it would be impossible for me to regrow it. One death on my side would kind of just tank me for the rest of the match. I would not be able to win, at least not easily, without doing something kind of ridiculous or ill-advised. So I was just kind of playing it as cautious as possible, and once I was able to take out Canderous, even though Mission was still around and she was doing her damage, I knew that I would probably have the time to be able to take this team out and be able to regrow most of their health and protection. So as you can see, I keep giving turn meter from First Order Officer to First Order Stormtrooper, because First Order Stormtrooper has the least protection right now, and as I keep saying, we want to have full protection, and whenever First Order Stormtrooper goes, there are buffs that go on him, and that regenerates his protection. So not to mention that First Order Officer also regrows protection, at least protection in terms of buffing First Order Stormtrooper, and in which case, under the KRU lead, he's regenerating 5% of his protection every time he gets a buff. So as you can see, I've been regrowing everything. Both Zalbar and Juhani are at their double stun status with KRU, and my whole goal here is obviously to get full banners. We want to take out Zalbar first, because if we take out a lot of Juhani, she's going to then, once her protection runs out, it will trigger a taunt on Zalbar, and that could really mess things up a little bit. So anyways, I actually gave the extra turn meter to Kylo just because I was feeling paranoid. He has those dots on him. I wanted to just make sure, and getting 60 banners was a huge relief here, because now in my final match I would be able to use Commander Luke and have a little bit of leeway in terms of my approach to it. Moving into the final match, I really wanted to make sure that I was able to do everything I could to win the match. I went under strength just in case my health or protection went down a little bit. I took L3 so that Chewie would protect CLS, but I had only 2 banner margin. If I lost more than 2 banners, my opponent would win via tiebreaker. So I needed to be as cautious as I could, and I didn't really have much experience with Commander Luke up to this point, just because the Commander Luke team has always been on defense for me in Territory Wars and in Grand Arena. So I just went in guns blazing. Luckily, for me at least, I put Gear 13 on the Commander Luke trio, and they operate at such a high level. They do so much damage now. It's really fun. And as you can see, they get enough turns that Chewie's loyal friend, Zeta, really helps them be able to regenerate their protection slowly. I mean, I think it's only like 3% a pop, but they're getting enough turns, and every time your opponent takes damage, you're doing a little bit more regeneration. So the hope here was obviously that I'd be able to have full health and protection, which I did on everyone except for L3. So 60 full banners, which is great, and that should be enough to beat my opponent by 3 points, which that was a really closely fought match. My opponent had some ridiculously awesome mods on all of their teams, and I feel really fortunate, honestly, to have escaped them. And even though we both full cleared each other, neither of us got over 1900 banners, just because both of us struggled against each other's defenses, I guess. I don't want to speak for my opponent. They clearly destroyed every single team that they faced, and I later found out from my opponent that they used Jawas to destroy my Geonosians, and that was a huge oversight on my end. I actually thought that that fix had gone through, which apparently it hasn't, so I should have checked my opponent's roster to see if they had Jawas, and if they did, I should have just kept Geonosians on offense, because that's just a free team that those Jawas get. That Jawas, like, there's no other use for them. They can't counter any other team, so really there was no point at all to having Geonosians on defense. That was just a gimme to my opponent. I did manage to get into Bronzium, but who cares? That's really not that important. Honestly, it's not hardly even a milestone. You get a little bit of gear, so wonderful, but let's move on. But let's keep striving for Kyber the way that I have been, and meanwhile, my next round opponent, I'll be in the finals. They already have a crazy roster, I believe. They have a ton of Gear 13, and I have a feeling I'm disadvantaged. I haven't looked at anything else other than their Gear 13s, but it's going to be a pretty intense match, so stay tuned for that. And until then, guys, thank you so much for watching, and remember that in all things, Zareth prevails.